There is a gospel attributed to the man ancient texts call the twin brother of Jesus. 114 sayings. No miracles, no resurrection, no church, just his words. And one of those sayings, possibly recorded before Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John were ever written, says this: "He who drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he." You don't follow Jesus. You become him. That's why they buried it. You're at home. It's late. The house is quiet. Somewhere on a shelf or in a drawer or in a box you haven't opened in years, there's a Bible. 66 books, Genesis to Revelation, the complete Word of God. That's what they told you. You know it. You've held it. You've heard it read from a pulpit more times than you can count. But tonight you learn something. There was another book, written by someone who knew Jesus so intimately that ancient texts call him his twin. He wrote down 114 things Jesus said, not stories, not miracles, not parables about sheep and coins, just his raw, unfiltered words. You've never read this book, you were never supposed to. Tonight that changes. My name is Nathan. If you've been following this channel, you know me. Former history teacher, 12 years at a Catholic school in Indiana. Resigned after I started asking the kind of questions they preferred I didn't. In my first investigation, I mentioned a text called the Gospel of Thomas. I read you one saying from it. Saying 3. The kingdom is inside of you. There's something I need to show you. That saying was just the surface. I've spent weeks reading the entire text, the scholarship around it, and the history of how it was found, suppressed, and nearly destroyed. What I found is worse than I expected. Not worse as in darker, worse as in more dangerous to the institution that claims to guard the truth. So let me tell you what the Gospel of Thomas actually is. It's 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. That's it. No narrative, no birth in Bethlehem, no miracles, no walking on water, no feeding 5,000, no crucifixion, no resurrection, no second coming, just words, sentence after sentence of things Jesus reportedly said. The first line of the text reads, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." 2 words in that opening line should make you pause. Secret and living. Not the risen Jesus. Not the resurrected Christ, the living Jesus. As if the man who wrote these words knew him while he was alive, and wrote down what he heard, before anyone turned his life into a story, before anyone decided what the story meant. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable for anyone who thinks the 4 canonical Gospels are the oldest source. In 2005, a scholar named April DeConnick at Rice University published a book called Recovering the Original Gospel of Thomas. She proposed something radical. She argued that the Gospel grew in layers over time, like a living document. Different sayings added in different decades. The oldest layer, what she calls the kernel, she dates to somewhere between 30 and 50 of the Common Era. Let that sink in. If DeConnick is right, parts of the Gospel of Thomas were written down while the people who actually knew Jesus were still alive. That makes it not just old. That makes it potentially the oldest Christian document in existence. Older than Mark, which most scholars date to around 65 to 70. Older than Paul's earliest letters. Older than anything in your New Testament. She's not alone. Stephen Patterson at Willamette University published his analysis in 1993. He concluded that Thomas represents, and I'm quoting, an autonomous stream of tradition, independent from the canonical 4 Gospels. He dates it to 70 to 80 of the Common Era. Still 1st century, still remarkably early. Now there are scholars who disagree. Nicholas Perrin argues Thomas depends on a 2nd century text and can't be earlier than about 175. Mark Goodacre at Duke argues Thomas was familiar with the Synoptic Gospels and therefore later. The debate is real. There is no consensus. But here's what nobody disputes. 63% of Thomas's sayings have parallels in the canonical Gospels. Same parables, same teachings, but in simpler forms. No allegory, no theological interpretation, no editorial commentary. As if someone wrote down the raw material before anyone shaped it into a message. If Thomas is early, then what the canonical Gospels did was take these sayings and build a religion around them. Add a birth story, add miracles, add a death and resurrection, add a church. And if Thomas is what the earliest Christians actually had, then everything that came after was construction. Imagine you're a Christian in 2nd century Syria. You don't have a Bible. That won't exist for another 200 years. What you have is a collection of sayings, words of Jesus, passed down by someone who knew him, someone called the twin. You gather in small groups. In someone's house, you read the sayings aloud, you discuss what they mean. No priest tells you the interpretation. No bishop approves the reading. No institution decides which words are sacred and which are forbidden. Just you and his words. That's what Thomas Christianity looked like. A living, breathing community built around direct engagement with the teachings. No intermediary. And that's exactly what they destroyed. Now pay attention to this. I'm going to read you several sayings from the Gospel of Thomas. Not paraphrased, not summarized. The actual words, as translated from the Coptic manuscript found at Nag Hammadi. Each one is more dangerous to the institutional church than the last. Saying 77. Jesus said, "It is I who am the light which is above them all. It is I who am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there." Split a piece of wood. God is in the wood, in the stone, in the ground under your feet, in the table you eat breakfast on, everywhere, in everything, not in a building, not in a sanctuary, not behind an altar, not accessible only through a priest, everywhere. If that's what Jesus actually said, then every church ever built was beside the point. Saying 108. Jesus said, "He who will drink from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him." Read that again in your mind. I myself shall become he. Not you will worship me. Not you will obey me. Not you will build a church in my name and follow its rules for the rest of your life. You will become me. The seeker doesn't follow Jesus. The seeker becomes Jesus. Total identification with the divine. If anyone can become Christ, then what exactly is the purpose of a priesthood? What is the purpose of a hierarchy? What is the purpose of any institution that positions itself between you and the divine? There isn't one. Saying 113. His disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. No second coming, no rapture, no apocalypse, no waiting for the end of the world, no enduring suffering now for paradise later. The kingdom is already here, spread out upon the earth, and people don't see it. Right now, wherever you are, think about every prayer you've said asking God to come. Every Sunday someone told you to hold on, endure. The kingdom is coming. After you die, after the judgment, after the rapture. And here, in a text that may be older than anything in your Bible, Jesus says the exact opposite. It's already here, under your feet, in the wood of the chair you're sitting in. You've been standing in it your entire life. You just weren't allowed to see it. Think about what that eliminates. The entire framework that says you need to endure, to wait, to suffer, to hope for a future reward. Thomas's Jesus says there's nothing to wait for. It's already here. You're standing in it. You just can't see it yet. Saying 70. Jesus said, "That which you have will save you if you bring it forth from yourselves. That which you do not have within you will kill you if you do not have it within you." What saves you is already inside you. Not a sacrament, not a baptism, not a priest's blessing, something already there waiting to be brought forth. And if you don't bring it forth, if the institution tells you to bury that instinct, that question, that doubt, it will destroy you from the inside. Carl Jung said essentially the same thing 1900 years later. Saying 22. Jesus said, "When you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, then will you enter the kingdom." This sounds nothing like Western Christianity. It sounds like something from the Upanishads, dissolving duality, transcending categories, no creed, no dogma, pure transformation of consciousness. And then saying 42. The shortest saying in the entire gospel. 3 words. Jesus said, "Become passers-by." 3 words. Don't build, don't accumulate, don't settle, don't create institutions. pass through. 3 words that dismantle every structure ever built in his name. And finally, saying 2. Jesus said, "Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over the all." Salvation is not faith, not belief, not accepting a creed or signing up for a church. It's a process. Seeking, finding, being troubled by what you find, being astonished, and then, at the end, you rule over the all. Not God rules over you, not the church rules over you. You do. That is not a theology you can build an institution around. That's a theology that makes every institution unnecessary. Now let me tell you about the man who recorded these sayings, because his identity is a revelation all by itself. Thomas, in Aramaic, the word toma means twin. In Greek, the word didymus also means twin. The Gospel of John identifies him as Thomas, called Didymus. His full name in the Syriac tradition is Judas Thomas, Judas the twin. Twin of whom? In a text called the Book of Thomas the Contender, also found at Nag Hammadi, Jesus addresses Thomas directly. He says, "Now since it has been said that you are my twin and true companion, examine yourself, my twin." In another text, the Acts of Thomas, written in the early 3rd century in Syria, people mistake Thomas for Jesus because they look identical. In one scene, Jesus sells Thomas into servitude by pretending to be his master. The two are interchangeable, one face, one voice. Charles Stang at Harvard Divinity School argues this isn't meant to be taken literally. He wrote a book on the concept of the divine double, the idea that every person carries within them a higher self that mirrors the divine. Thomas represents the possibility that any person can become Jesus' twin, can achieve the same consciousness, the same direct access. And that connects straight back to saying 108, "I myself shall become he." The twinship isn't exclusive to Thomas, it's available to everyone. That's the message. The man who was closest to Jesus, who knew him so well that texts call him his identical twin, wrote down sayings that say, "You can be what I am." If you've ever read a Bible passage and felt it sounded processed, like someone had polished it, organized it, added interpretation you didn't ask for. If you've ever sat alone after a sermon and thought, something is missing here. I don't know what, but this doesn't feel complete. If you ever wished you could strip away the theology and just hear what he actually said, raw and unfiltered, without 17 centuries of editing standing between you and his words, that instinct was right. That text exists. It survived burial, burning, banning, and 1600 years underground. And you just heard it. When I first read this text, really read it front to back, I had one question. Why don't more people know about this? The answer is straightforward. The church spent 1700 years making sure they didn't. Around 200 to 235 AD, Hippolytus of Rome quoted from the Gospel of Thomas in a work called The Refutation of All Heresies. He wasn't praising it. He was using it as evidence against a group he considered dangerous, but the fact that he quoted it means the text was already circulating. People were reading it, it was real. By about 325, Eusebius of Caesarea, the historian closest to Emperor Constantine, classified Thomas in his church history as, and I'm quoting, an absurd, impious and heretical fiction. And then came Cyril of Jerusalem. Around 350 AD, Cyril wrote this in his catechetical lectures, "Let none read the Gospel according to Thomas, for it is the work not of one of the 12 apostles, but of one of the 3 wicked disciples of Mainz." He was lying. Mainz founded Manichaeism in the 3rd century. Thomas was written long before. But Cyril didn't care about accuracy. He cared about control. But listen to what else Cyril said. He called Thomas a text tinctured with the fragrance of the evangelic title that corrupts the souls of the simple sort. Tinctured with the fragrance. It smells like a real gospel. It reads like a real gospel. And it corrupts souls. The problem wasn't that Thomas was fake. The problem was that people couldn't tell the difference between Thomas and the approved Gospels, because it sounded just as authentic, maybe more so. By 367 AD, Athanasius issued his list of 27 canonical books. Thomas wasn't on it. Everything not on the list was to be destroyed. Someone in Egypt, around 400 AD, took the texts they could save, wrapped them in leather, sealed them in a clay jar, and buried them in the desert. They survived underground for 1,545 years. But here's a detail that still amazes me. In the winter of 1896 to 1897, two Oxford archaeologists named Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt were excavating an ancient garbage dump near a town called Oxyrhynchus in Egypt. On the second day of digging, they found Greek text fragments on papyrus. They published them under the title Sayings of Our Lord from an early Greek papyrus. They had no idea what they'd found. There was no reference text to compare it to. They were puzzled by these strange sayings attributed to Jesus that didn't match any known gospel. And they moved on. 50 years later, when the full Coptic Gospel of Thomas was discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, scholars finally realized what Grenfell and Hunt had been holding all along. Those fragments from the garbage dump were pieces of the same gospel. They'd been sitting in Oxford libraries unidentified for half a century, and in August of 2023, a new fragment was published. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 5575, a 2nd century Greek fragment of the Gospel of Thomas. Now the oldest known manuscript evidence for this text. The physical evidence keeps getting older. The church tried to destroy every copy, and the text keeps resurfacing, from sealed jars, from garbage dumps, from library shelves where nobody thought to look. 1,700 years of trying to bury it, and it won't stay buried. J.J. Benítez, the Spanish journalist who spent over 40 years investigating the historical Jesus, said something in an interview that I keep coming back to. He said, "Jesus did not found any church. That is a later business of human beings." And in another, "It never occurred to Jesus to found an institution that would restrict the freedom of those who didn't think like him." When I read those quotes alongside the Gospel of Thomas, something clicked. Because Thomas is the proof. This is the text that shows what the teaching looked like before anyone organized it into a religion, before the miracles, before the hierarchy, before the sacraments and the tithing and the power structure. Benítez also said, "The canonical Gospels are a disaster, poorly told, mutilated, manipulated." For decades, the Catholic Church attacked him. A bishop in Monterrey, Mexico, publicly asked that his books be burned. In the 21st century, the instinct hasn't changed. 1,700 years later, and the first response to anything that threatens the institution is still the same. The summer after I resigned from St. Augustine's, I sat in my study with a stack of books I'd been afraid to read while I was on the church's payroll. One of them was a paperback translation of the Gospel of Thomas. 114 sayings. Thin book. You can read it in under an hour. I read it front to back in one sitting, and when I got to saying 77, split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone and you will find me there. I put the book down. Not because I didn't believe it, because I did. And if that's what Jesus actually said, then 12 years of teaching from a Catholic podium was about the wrong book. Not the wrong faith, not the wrong God, the wrong book. The institution took his words, buried the ones that didn't serve them, built a structure of power around the ones that did, and handed me a curriculum that left out the most important part. The part that says you don't need any of this. The answer is already inside you. It's in the wood, it's under the stone, it's everywhere. You just have to look. I still have that paperback on my desk, dog-eared, coffee-stained, margins full of notes I wrote that summer when everything was falling apart and coming together at the same time. I don't read it for information anymore. I know it by heart. I read it because it reminds me of what Christianity could have been. Not a hierarchy, not an institution, not a system of control built on guilt and obedience and the fear of what happens when you die. Just a teacher, sitting with the people closest to him, saying the answer is inside you. The kingdom is already here. Split a piece of wood, lift up a stone. You'll find it everywhere you look. You always could. 114 sayings. No church, no priest, no tithe, no creed, just his words. And the silence after you read them. That's the question. Was Christianity built on what Jesus said, or on what someone else decided his life should mean? The text exists. You can read it yourself. And when you do, I think you'll understand why they spent 1,700 years trying to make sure you never would.